switched over. I started as a grain inspector, and honestly, I have no idea how I got involved in agriculture. I grew up in the west end of Toledo as a city boy. And I took this job probing rail cars and helping inspectors out so I could make money to go to the university and study engineering. And 35 years later, I retired from agriculture. So I started as a grain inspector. I went to Philly in '83. That's where I met Tom Yeoman, my business partner. We were both inspectors there. And I know the first inspection I ever went out on was a potato inspection with this guy that had probably been an inspector for about 35 years. And I still think potatoes is it's probably I still think it's the toughest commodity of all of them to inspect. And you'll see why tomorrow. But, you know, and the guy asked me, he says, so you were a grain inspector, huh? He says, that's interesting. He says, how many standards did you work with in grain? And I said, well, there are only 10. I said, but, you know, in Northwest Ohio, we only really deal with 4 types of grains, so that's about it. He said, so 4. He says, well, you're going to deal with about 90 standards now with fruit and vegetable, and they're all written differently. And he said, I'm not telling you that to try to scare you off or intimidate you or anything. What I want to instill in you is that to learn this job, you have to be patient. Because if you think you're going to learn it next week or next month or even next year, you're fooling yourself and you're setting yourself up for a big disappointment. I said, well, how long do you think I should give myself before I get frustrated? He thought about it and he says, I'd give yourself 5 years. I said, 5 years? I said, that's a master's degree. He says, yeah, he says, don't worry about it. He says, give yourself 5 years. He said, if you don't like it then start looking for something else. And I have to say, he was spot on to a point, but here I'm 41 years into inspecting some kind of agricultural commodity. And every one of these classes, I still learn something that I didn't know yesterday. And so I don't think you'll ever know it all. And if any of you have ever picked up a standard or a USDA handbook and looked at them, you'll understand why. There's no way to keep all of that in your head. You know, it's almost ever evolving, it's ever changing. And as our geneticists keep, you know, monkeying around with Mother Nature and everything else and giving us new varieties and new cultivars, everything, this whole process will continue to change. Okay? What we're going to start off with this morning is just going over some of the basics of inspection, the basics terminology and things like that. I understand, Larry gave me a great tour of the place yesterday. And one of the questions I always ask is, you know, if you get federal inspections, yes, and what's your average cost? And I would say you guys are pretty much ringing the bell here. I was told somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500 for a federal inspection because they have to fly somebody in. It's ridiculous. I think this is the thing that keeps IPT and Tom and I on the road and busy in retirement, is that companies can't get timely inspections anymore. And when they do get them, the cost is prohibitive. So the best thing to do is learn how to inspect the product like a Fed does. Make sure your vendors and your shippers know that you're getting this training. In turn, they end up calling us to say, hey, look, we need to know what you're teaching them. And then using today's technology, at that point, who needs a federal inspection and who needs to mess around with the PHCA? And boy, we find that every month as we go on, every company does fewer and fewer inspections. I mean, some were getting 5, 6, 7 inspections a week, some every day. Now they're saying, a lot of these companies are saying, we're lucky if we see the guy once every, I don't know, month, 2 months, because we're doing it on our own and we're working it out more with the vendor. All right. So with that in mind, we'll start and look at some of the basics. First, a little background about IPT. Both Tom and I started and spent most of the lion's share of our careers with USDA. And Tom started IPT before he left. He left the USDA. He went into, of all things, what a correlation, went from the USDA to the FAA to design training programs for them. You know, fruits and vegetables to airplanes. Makes sense, right? It's government, yeah. So, yeah. So when he got to the FAA, he started IPT and used his vacation leave. And I think that's when he came out here, was on one of his week's vacation, and he was doing 3 or 4 classes a year. And we had always talked about this when we were trainers at the facility in Fredericksburg, that, you know, boy, there's a better way to do this. You could really take this on the road. You could put as many people in the class. It's all the same company. They could all spill their guts. and you know, talk about the things that are near and dear to them without, you know, feeling silly in front of a competitor, if you will, you know. And so Tom started IPT, and he got enlisted his son, who's a real tech wizard, chiphead. I guess you're the resident tech guy, right? Yeah.
This morning.
This morning, you were at least, okay. And we created this website. Now, you've got a copy of my business card in front of you, and on the back of it is our website. We've designed this because, I don't know if you've ever gone on USDA's website to try to find out any information, standards, and scoring guidelines and handbooks. Good luck finding anything. I mean, we were frustrated, and we worked for them. We couldn't find it, you know. So we wanted to make things easier. And I don't know if you've ever read a standard or not, but some of them are. I think like the potato standard is like 17 pages long, and the peach standard is about 9 pages long, and it's all written in the gobbledygook lingo that, you know, the USDA lawyer legalese. Kind of hard to understand, and we wanted to simplify that, and that's exactly what we've tried to do. Here's our homepage. You notice in the lower right-hand corner we have this resource button, and 2 areas I'd like to point out to you. The first one would be down here, the inspection guidelines. We tried to take those standards, put them in common, simple English, and make them no longer than 2 pages long. You know, and so what we've got is, here's an example of peaches. The grades that are available, the tolerances are available. We've even thrown in the PACA good delivery tolerances, which are not included in any standard, but you really have to know that if you're working in this business. And then we've listed the most common defects and how much of each one you're allowed before you score it as a defect, and kept it that simple. And we've done this for every one of the commodities where there's a standard for it. Okay, to make it easy. Please use it as a resource. The other thing we've done is we've created this inspector's blog. And so when inspectors find really oddball stuff, they say, well, what's this? We've never seen this defect before. They'll email us in a picture. We'll do our best to try, if we don't know, we'll try to get a scoring guideline from USDA, from the training center in Fredericksburg. And if that doesn't work, which oftentimes it doesn't, we'll just put it up there for comment. And anybody that logs onto the website can feel free. They've seen it. We appreciate comments. We certainly appreciate inspectors sharing pictures with us of a lot of this oddball stuff. All right. Normally during some parts of the year, if we know we're running into a certain issue, like say if they've had a freeze in the citrus growing areas, we will put up a reminder. Look, this is what you have to be cutting for tree dryness, granulation, you know, dry juice sacs, things like that, that would be affected by cold temperatures, and it's just warnings to inspectors like, look, you need to be on the lookout for some of this stuff, okay? Grade standards. I've been asked this a million times, you know, why aren't the standards all the same? Why didn't you make them, what's the matter with USDA? What were they thinking when they didn't make everything 10% damage, 5 serious damage, and 1% decay? It sure would have been a lot easier. And boy, it sure would have been a lot easier, but the problem is the USDA has no authority to create or amend these standards whatsoever. Their inspectors use these standards, and that's about it. They assist the industry in writing the standard, but it's the industry that is the driver. And it's usually, unfortunately for you guys, it's the growing end, the vendor end of the industry that does the most driving. And so you'll notice sometimes some of these defects, you think, boy, they sure allow a lot of that defect. Why is that? It's because the growers know that they have a problem with that defect, and they've given themselves a lot of wiggle room. And you're going to see numerous examples of that as we go on in the next couple of days. All right. These standards, just like our simplified version, they'll include all the definitions of what's damage and serious damage, the tolerances, the grades. As I said, they won't include the PACA good delivery tolerances. I don't know, are you guys dealing much with that anymore, good delivery? You have to take stuff. You know, at one point, those of you that aren't familiar with, you know what PACA good delivery is. A little bit higher percentage of defects that the PACA allows because you've got a perishable commodity in transit. And so technically, yeah, you could fail to grade US #1, but it could meet PACA good delivery. And in the past, essentially that vendor could force you to take a product that was technically out of grade. And you'd have to live with it. And I know when Tom and I started back in the early 80s, that happened all the time. Vendors and receivers got along about like this, fire and gasoline. And that worm is sure turned, I'll tell you, it's a lot different world now. And so I know there's two commodities that are usually marketed on good delivery, that's berries and iceberg lettuce. And if you're not handling too much of either of those, God bless you, hallelujah. You know, that really helps. Where's the Ohio State shirt? That's what I want to know. That's right here. You know, again, when we look at these standards, you'll see they all have a date on them. Some of these standards go back to the 30s. That's how old they are, because the industry has not asked the USDA to change them. Now, these older standards that we see, I got to kind of scratch my head, because you know handling practices have changed, cultivars have changed, a lot of things have changed over the years. Varieties have changed, and I can't believe that didn't affect a change to the standard. All right, so just keep that in mind. You'll see when they set these up, and we'll talk about some of these, you know, certain definitions, grades. You'll see certain things like basic requirements, free from defects. We'll define all those in the next few seconds. But reading one of these standards can get a little tedious because of just the verbiage that's involved, and we want to make it kind of simple. So here's an example. This is from the sweet pepper standard. We're going to be talking about that in the next hour, the standard itself and the commodity itself. This is a definition for one defect, damage by scars in sweet peppers. And you'll see that, you know, with all that gobbledygook in there, there's a couple terms that are very consistently used throughout these standards. Aggregating and this correspondingly greater and lesser areas. All right, so when we look at aggregating, all we're trying to do is, you know, most of these standards are set up where you're allowed a 1/2 inch circle of scarring, or a 1/4 inch circle of that, or 3/8 inch circle of that. And what you have to do, in a perfect world, there would be one defect on that commodity, and you could put one of these nice little clear sizing rings on it and say, boy, is that scar bigger than what I'm allowed or not? And it would be real easy. Well, as you know, most of the time, there's more than one defect on a specimen. And so here's where the first bit of what I would call guesstimation comes in when you're an inspector. You've got to push all those together and then ask yourself, now do I exceed whatever the amount I'm allowed? I don't know, have you ever seen one of these? You can pass these around. If you ever go on the USDA Supply Depot, that's probably the cheapest piece of equipment that they have, and it's the only cheap piece of equipment that you can buy on there. I think they're like $1 or $1.50 a piece. It's a great way to train your eye what a 1/2 inch looks like, or an inch area looks like, or whatever. But, you know, I don't know. I've never seen an inspector, including this one, ever use one of those during the course of an inspection. And with as fast as you guys have to do your inspections because of trucks unloading and everything else, you have to look at things much faster and make much quicker decisions. I don't think you have time to use one of those. All right, so again, a great tool to train your eye when you have a little bit of free time, although I don't know if there is such an animal in this business. All right, but to get an idea, aggregating, again, you're pushing these defects together, then you're making this judgment call of whether there's enough there or not. All right. The second issue is this correspondingly greater or lesser areas. Every single standard, when it tells you you're allowed X amount of, you know, circle of aggregated defect, whatever the defect may be, is based on a certain size specimen. For peppers, it's a 2.5 inch diameter pepper. Well, when I started, that was, you know, a 2.5 inch diameter pepper is only that big around. Now you think about this. Let's look at, this is what we usually get. What's that, maybe 4 inches diameter? 4.25 inches in diameter. So it's a lot bigger than what we're allowed. Well, if I'm allowed a 3/8 inch scar, that's what the standard says, it's based on a 2.5 inch pepper. So if I'm looking at much bigger peppers, I have to allow a lot more area for the defect. And this is what gets inspectors in a lot of trouble oftentimes, is they'll say, well, I'm looking at these big peppers, but the standard only says I'm allowed 3/8 inch of a scar. So they take out 20 peppers from their samples and look at all these defects I've got. You know, I've got 40% damage by scarring. When if they had allowed for more area of scarring, they probably wouldn't. You know, and so yeah, you go to the vendor, you say, hey, I got 40% defects. The vendor says, I don't think so. I'd like a federal on that. The federal comes in, and even at $1,200, it's worth their money because the Fed's going to come in and he's going to make this compensation change. And you know, when he comes back and hands you a certificate that says US #1 on it because there's really only 5% scoreable defects, guess who gets the bill? You guys. Yeah. Yeah, and $1,200, $1,500, I don't think you want that bill. You know, think how many more IPT classes you could do. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, see, we don't want you to have that bill either. All right, so keep this in mind. You know, this is a real easy one. You know, if I'm allowed 3/8 inch on a 2.5 inch pepper, if I go to a 5 inch pepper, yeah, I've got to double that. I've got to double the amount of scarring. You know, and you've got to make some compensation because it's usually not that easy of a calculation. And without getting into the only thing that you'll ever use out of, I'm sure we've all taken stupid math in school. You know, the algebra, trig, all that rigmarole that you never use, any of it. All right, you can use an algebraic equation to come up with, to figure the difference, solve for x, but we won't go into all of that, okay? Here are some of the other common standard terminologies. And I'm gonna bet for the most part you guys buy most things on a US #1. Is that fair? All right, you buy some #2 or choice product, okay? What you're basically then going to deal with are these two defects right here, damage and serious damage. The only time you come in, you know, have to deal with an injury type defect is if you're dealing with a high grade.
You touched the screen. It went to your next slide.
So if I touch the screen, it's going, okay, I get it. I see it. I can play by any rules, I just got to know what the rules are. That's all. Okay, I won't touch the screen. All right, the injury is going to affect extra fancy type product. And I don't know, unless you're handling apples or maybe pears, you're probably not going to deal with anything that's extra fancy. Consequently, down at the bottom, you may have to deal with a restricted tolerance on very serious damage because those involve products that have a US #3 grade, and I think you guys handle quite a few of them. Tomatoes, avocados, lemons, other types of citrus, certain, depending on where they're from, California, Florida, oranges and grapefruit. Things like that have a #3 grade, and so you've got to be cognizant of that. One way to look at the difference between these four terms is the amount of a defect you're allowed before you score it. So for example, if I could have up to a 1/4 inch scar for an extra fancy grade, I could only have I'd have a 1/2 inch there, 3/4 inch there, 1 inch there. So you're allowing for a bigger area, a more serious defect as you go down this list. Normally with these two right here, damage and serious damage, you have separate tolerances in the standard. So this would be your damage tolerance, your 10% tolerance. This would be your restricted tolerance, 5% serious damage. That's pretty common. Sometimes you're going to have standards that don't have a serious damage tolerance. But you'll see in the standard, in the inspection instructions, if you look at that USDA puts out, they'll talk all about serious damage. You say, well, what's that have to do with anything? Why are they even mentioning it serious damage? Because there's no restricted tolerance. It's because there's a #2 grade, and a damage defect is not scored against a choice, a #2. It's got to be at least this bad, and then you allow the maximum tolerance. Okay, everybody on board with that? I did it again.
Sometimes you don't have to touch it, just be close.
You just got to get close?
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's really smart. It's a super smart TV.
I'm hearing Twilight Zone music now. Okay. The bottom two are what I'm going to say just about every QA I know and work with uses as their basis for inspection. And I'm going to say it's what every federal or Fed state inspector uses too, whether they'll admit it to you or not. Tom and I both spent a lot of years as federal inspectors. I'm going to tell you, this is what we use as the basis for inspecting most of the time. and whether it was 3/8 or 5/8 or 3/16, you know, some of these, the differentiation between damage and serious damage is an 1/8 of an inch difference. And if you're inspecting with any pace whatsoever or speed, to be able to tell that small of a difference of an aggregate area is impossible unless you're actually measuring it. And I don't know many inspectors that do that, okay? And so you have these two definitions, and depending on the standard, it can be written different ways too. Sometimes you'll see it written as, well, you score this defect under the general definition of damage and, general definition of damage and serious damage. You say, okay, well, what the heck is that? And they say, well, if it materially or seriously detracts from the appearance. And you say, boy, that doesn't help me a whole much. How much are you allowed? Well, you know what it comes down to? The inspector's discretion is what it comes down to. Now, when you're trying to put together an inspection crew and you're all, I mean, consistency, if you think about it, is the key to any success of having an inspection team. You want to all be looking at it the same way and scoring it the same way. And I've even gone one step further. I don't care if we're all consistently doing it wrong, as long as we're all consistently doing it the same way. The consistency is the key, okay? And this is a very tough one to be consistent on, because you could look at something one way and you could look at something another and you could look at it a third way, and I could come along and say, I don't even know what you guys are looking at. There's no defect. And so here's the problem. So here's what I've used as my basis for using materially and seriously detracting for 40 years now, and I haven't gotten in too much trouble with it yet, okay? I look at it like I'm a consumer. All right, when I pick that product up and put it in my basket, well, guess what? It meets grade, whatever grade I'm working. Right? If I would pick it up and think about it and put it back down, it materially detracts, and therefore it goes against the total damage tolerance, the total defect tolerance. And if I would look at it and not waste my time picking it up, maybe laugh at it at the grocery store, like, what the heck is the store thinking about putting that out? You know, who's going to buy it? Then I would say that seriously detracts, and it would go against a restricted tolerance or against a number 2 or a choice grade. And, you know, that's about as simple as I can put it, and if you look at it in that respect, you know, that might not solve all your consistency problems either. This is why my wife and I can't go grocery shopping together. Because she thinks you can cut bruises out and you still got viable product. That bruise shouldn't even be scored as a defect. And if it's bruised, I won't pick it up. You know, and so there's a trade-off. We have a big chain that's right across the road from our development, and it's gotten so bad with this chain in the last 8 months. Used to have beautiful produce, and they don't anymore. They buy a lot of seconds now, but they don't clean them up. And so now I go over there with my iPhone, and I just, in the produce department, I'm just taking pictures, you know. Let's do this a couple weeks ago, and I feel this tug on the back of my shirt. It's my wife. And through gritted teeth, she looks at me and says, what do you think you're doing? You know, I said, taking pictures, man. These are good defects. You know, I don't have these on the show. And she says, can't you just buy them and take them home? I said, wait a minute. You want me to buy defective product, take it home, take 2 pictures, toss them in the trash? Do you ever want to go to Cancun again? You know, I'm not doing it. I'm going to take them right here. They're going to put this stuff out for me, then I'm going to take a picture of it. And I said, I'll meet you at the cash register. She said, maybe. She says, just understand, I'm not posting bail. I won't do it. So I said, now I wanted to ask me, because then I'm going to give him my card and say, you know what, I think you need me more than I need you, because this is trash, you know. Yeah, I just clear out a little table and I'll put the defects down and take pictures, and I'll put them back and I'll get the other more defects, and yeah, they haven't said anything to me yet.
You should probably tell them they need us more than they need anyone.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, they need somebody to clean their mess up is what they do. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if you know the chain. I don't care if they say it or not, because they're not clients. Meyer, you ever heard of Meyer? You do any work with Meyer? I know they're more Michigan, Indiana, Ohio.
Yeah, we don't go to Michigan.
Yeah.
You wouldn't see defects on your shelf.
If they use
If they work with us, then it's gotta be.
You guys did got a pretty tight shop back there from what I saw yesterday, you know. And there's the thing is, I guess the advantage of, you know, dealing with a company like Capital City, because you guys do clean it up and you got good quality control in-house, where most of these chains, I don't care if they've got a 1 million square foot facility, they have no ability to clean up product. So it's either they reject everything or they take it with quote protection and then put garbage out on the shelves, a la what our Meyer is doing, you know, but there's no way to clean it up. Yeah, they need somebody like your company there. So maybe you guys can reach your arms out a little bit further into Ohio and Michigan and, you know, clean up, because they're certainly not cleaning up, all right? 3 other terms that you got to know in standards. One is basic requirements, and a basic requirement is a gotta have. All right, it's got to be a certain shape, it's got to be a certain cleanness, it's got to be a certain texture. In some instances, it's got to be a certain color, or it's got to be a certain sugar content. You know, and that's where you get the old refract out and you test for sugar. Sugar is what a lot of people don't realize is once that product's harvested, that's all the sugar you're getting. The sugar may manifest itself differently as the product ripens, and it could taste different, but you're not going to have any different sugar content percentage-wise. So those are gotta-haves and basic requirements. The second one is where a lot of inspectors get themselves in trouble, because they see this defect in the standard is free from. So they said, well, I have a 0% tolerance. Negative. That is completely incorrect. No, you score any amount of the free from defect against whatever tolerance that defect is scored against. There is a tolerance. And I don't think there's one standard that's set up with a 0 tolerance for decay, which is the most common free from defect, some kind of decay and rot. There are others, you'll see several of them in the next couple of days, but that is one thing you got to get in your mind. How, you know, I score one little pin dot of decay the same as I would score if that entire pepper was decayed. You don't differentiate, it all goes against the decay tolerance. All right? And then you have the free from damage, free from serious damage, and those are the ones you have to look, okay, how much am I allowed? If it materially detracts or if it seriously detracts, okay? Now these are terms you guys in your industry have cooked up over the years that have driven inspectors like me insane, okay? Because I don't know what they are. Choice, yeah, all right, choice is a nice way to church up something that's not so nice, you know? It's a number 2, that's all it is, all right? Choice, you know, I would call a Ferrari in my driveway as being choice, but I wouldn't call a number 2 lemon as choice, you know what I mean? It's not, it's ugly. So, the next 3 usually have to deal with cucumbers. Plain, select, and super select. And I've seen, this is an absolute moving target. You guys handle cukes? Do you handle all 3 of those? Tell me what they are in your definition. What is a plain, what's the difference between a plain, a select, and a super select? Go ahead.
A super select, we refer to them as all the same size and then straight, so that there's no curvature on them.
Okay.
Select would be multiple sizes with kind of bends, boomerangs, things like that.
Okay.
A plain is a larger size.
A larger size.
A plain is a smaller one. It's almost like a step above a
the little ones.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's a great definition. It's completely different than what I was told by a cucumber shipper in Ohio about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's a bad thing.
Yeah. And this is why these are moving targets. And when we get down to fancy, that's another one. Not US fancy, that's a grade in some standards. Fancy is something else that usually pertains to things like summer squash and eggplant. Now, why bought a fancy? I've heard it, lemons referred to fancy as well, and there's no fancy grade. I said, okay, well, what is that? I mean, I had a head of one of the QA departments when he first started. He started as a buyer, took over the QA of one of the big supermarket chain, and he says, well, this year we want to cover both cucumbers and summer squash in our training class. I said, that's great. Here's our specs, because they have their own in-house specs. And I look at it and I say, okay, so you're buying selects and super select cukes and fancy summer squash. But so what does that mean? And he said, well, you're the inspector, you're the one with the experience, you tell us. I said, I have no way to access any of that because I don't know. This is something that you and your buyers and your vendors have cooked up, and it's going to vary. And he really thought I was yanking his chain. He thought I was making it up, you know, and he got mad at me. And I said, Lou, I'm not making this up. You've got to tell me what it is. And it usually has something to do in the cucumbers with the shape. I was basically told by the cucumber, a super select is a fancy, a select is a #1, and a plain is a choice, #2. You know, and all it has to do with how much scar and how much curve. You know, as you go down, more scars, more curve, and that's why. And I've always thought it was a difference between, you know, a minimum maximum diameter and or a minimum maximum length, just like the fancy is for the squash. And that's usually where the differences come in. It's some difference, but for every company I've worked with, it's a little different. So there is no uniform, you know, you gave me your definition of plain select and super select. Hallelujah, I think that's wonderful. So now we know what your definition is. You know? And I can go to 3 other companies, 5 other companies, probably 50 other companies, and I'll get some little variation of that somewhere. All right, so the bottom line here is, if you get one of these expensive federal inspections, the feds guy is going to come in and he's always going to base it on a #1, or if there's another grade marked on the box, then he'll base it on that. But other than that, if you're buying something, if you've got these crazy, you know, terminology like this, or you're actually buying a choice or a #2, but it's not marked on the box, make sure you tell the inspector, because he's going to base it on a #1. No sense you buying a 2, getting an inspection, not telling the inspector, he bases it on a 1 and it fails. Of course it's going to fail. It wasn't even shipped as a 1, you know. So yeah, you got to let them know, so you're not wasting your time and money, and the inspector's not spinning their wheels either, you know, wasting time. Let them know right up front. Okay. Here's a big issue, and one that anybody that's involved in QC has got to be able to differentiate between quality type defects and condition type defects. All right? And very simply, quality defects are inherent to the product. They do not change over time. They won't get worse. So you look at things like shape, scars, anything that's inherent to that product during the growing, like growth cracks, poor color, rough texture. Things like that are not going to get any worse, you know. That doesn't get any better, all right? Scars aren't going to get any darker, any better. They're not going to get any worse. They are what they are what they, you know, you see. This is one that I'd say growth cracks it happens a lot with root crops, where they either grow too fast, split apart early in their development stage, and then heal over prior to harvest, or they grow up against something. Another potato, a root, a rock, something like that, and it causes this indentation. Normally there's, outside of that oddball shape, there's nothing wrong with that product. In fact, if the potato industry was smart, you see a lot of growth cracks, they would market that as a premium product as far as I'm concerned. Because you bake that, and you run your knife right down, and that's where the butter and the sour cream, and the salt, and the pepper, and the chives, and the bacon, and all the other happy stuff, the broccoli, everything goes in that spot. It's perfect. The potato industry will listen to me. You know, okay, you got a primo product there. You should run with it. Lousy color. They're not going to get any better color as the ground color may change, you know, to give an indicator of ripeness. But lousy color is not going to get any better. And with texture, you know, you get your typical choice lemon over here with the shark fins and the rough texture and the sheep noses and everything else that goes along with it. All right, so those things are quality type defects. Condition defects are the ones that you guys spend a lot of time running product to get the bad stuff out of, because it's something that's going to get worse. And the most common things are shriveling, bruising, some kind of discoloration, whether it be internal or external, and then of course some kind of decay or soft rot, some kind of deterioration of the product. You know, shriveling, if you think about what the content is, the makeup of everything that we look at and handle. What's the majority of all fruits and vegetables?
Water.
Water, exactly. Yeah, and as the product gets older, it starts to dry out. As it starts to dry out, it starts to shrivel. Some of these products, as we talked about yesterday, if you put them in too cold of an environment, you'll just enhance the shriveling and the pitting. Peppers is one of them. You know, they're kept too cold for too long, and boy, they start to shrivel up pretty fast. You know, then you're constantly working them, you know, to get the bad stuff out. Bruising. This is one where if in a lot of products, all it does is indent the product and cause some kind of discoloration. In other products, you really have to look at bruising two different ways, and there usually is two different scoring guidelines for bruising. How big the bruise is externally, that you can see, and then how deep the bruise is, and how much of the flesh it discolors or turns mushy. And so whenever you see a bruise and it's not quite big enough, what you really need to do is either cut that product in half, or it's something like stone fruit, you take a V cut out of it because you can't usually get through the pit very well, and you can see just how dark and mushy some of these areas get that are within the fruit. The depth is usually a much smaller number than the area of the bruise. So if you don't think the bruise is bad enough to score as a defect, cut it. And then see how deep it goes, because that usually will be the scoring guideline, the depth over the area. Okay? Condition defects, I mean, you guys handle what? Mostly, I would say most of what you handle is tomatoes here, isn't it? So I'm sure SDA and shoulder bruises you're very familiar with. Probably the most common defect you're going to find in tomatoes. You know, again, probably we think it's more of an issue of age than anything else. You just got older product, you know, and as I understand, you guys handle mostly a lot of seconds, right? That you rework? Yeah, so there could be, it's kind of what I affectionately call, and don't take this the wrong way, because believe me, it's admirable, but every area, every city has a garbage house or rework house. And you guys are doing it. Yeah, I could go into any market, Hunts Point, Philly, Boston, any of them, and all I need to do is go around the parking lot and I'll tell you who has the garbage house. Because that's where the Ferrari, the Bentley is. That's where the money's at, man. That's where the cheesecake is at. Yeah. Yeah. I'm hoping you take me for a ride in your Ferrari at lunchtime, as a matter of fact. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's usually the owner that has the Ferrari, not us people that work there. So, yeah, I mean, you're going to see a lot of this stuff, you know. Discolorations. I mean, here you've got just age-related surface discolorations, okay? But the other thing you really have to watch out is for a lot of internal breakdown and internal discoloration. And man, I've worked with, this has been an oddball year. Some of the companies I've worked with this year that you think would know better, I leave just scratching my head like, I don't know how you're still in business, because either their inspectors aren't allowed to cut anything, or in the one instance I told you, one company, they don't cut anything, and if they want to look at it internally, they take the product and they break it off on the side of the table, because none of their inspectors are checked out on knives. I said, excuse me, checked out on it? My mom checked me out on knives when I was 6. You know, and I still managed to almost cut a finger off twice as an inspector. Big deal. You go to the hospital, you get your tetanus shot, you get your stitches, they wrap it up, you go back to work. You know, but they're afraid of an OSHA claim, so they don't give their inspectors any knives. Hence, their inspectors aren't allowed to cut anything. And so I said, well, then you're taking one heck of a risk, because I'm going to say that about half the defects of all these commodities have internal defects that you can't ever see externally. And then you get to potatoes, and I think that number goes to about 85 or 90% of the defects. Yeah, you got it. You're checked out on knives, I'm hoping. And then lastly is decay. And remember, this is a free from defect. Any amount of it. Had an instance a couple years ago working with an inspector, and you know, we were taking pictures that were cucumbers. And you know, in cucumbers, you'll get these little warts every now and then. And every time you press one of these little warts, it popped like a blister. So it was very, very early stage. What I would say was probably gray mold rot, you know, but they were popping. I'm thinking, boy, that's going to be a real mess, especially how much water is in a cucumber. I said, these are gonna be a bloody mess probably this afternoon, much less tomorrow morning. And so we did our calculation, I think it was 9–10% decay, took our pictures, which you could not see anything because they were so small, and sent them off to the buyer who was 800 miles away. Buyer calls back and says, well, I don't see anything. Do you know what you're looking at? And the inspector was smart enough that day. He says, oh, you don't see anything? Well, here's Paul. I have him explain it. And he throws the phone at me. Well, I said, don't get me involved in your problems. You know, it's decay. So, and I told the buyer, I said, you know, sometimes, you know, the old adage, the picture says 1,000 words. Well, in this case, it doesn't say any words. You know, I said, you can't see it, but boy, you better take your inspector's advice. I said, because if you keep these, good luck, is all I can say. You know, I can't tell you when they're going to explode or how badly they're going to explode, just that they're going to explode. And leave it at that. So and they ended up rejecting them. But the buyer, several hundred miles away, was prepared to take them because he could not see the decay. And I said, you have to remember, this is a free-from defect. So one little dot of it is all you need. You don't have to see, you know, the whole thing. You don't have to see a nest of mold, you know, in order to have a problem. All right. So why differentiate? Why? What's the big deal? And it's because, as you're going to see here, some of these standards and these tolerances are set up where the quality defects and the condition defects have different tolerances. They separate them for damage and for serious damage. You normally have a lower tolerance for quality defects than you do condition defects. And that's why you really have to be able to recognize them. Some companies have fixed this on their own. They've come up with their own spec, and they treat it just like PACA does. They don't separate them. They treat quality and condition defects the same way. You know, as I said, PACA does the same, okay? Sampling. Biggest question, most asked question I get, every class. What is the perfect sample? How much sample do I take? That's like asking me, how long is a piece of string? There's no good answer. There's no definitive answer, that's for sure. You take enough samples from different locations, a representative sample, and you take enough until you're as sure as you're going to be in your mind that that product is either in grade or out of grade. Whether that's 3 samples, whether that's 30 samples, you know, sometimes on a real close lot, it may be 30 samples. You know, I would normally, as a rule, and I think Tom would agree with me on this, we would always take 3 minimum. So if there was a problem, you would have a range and an average, okay? Up to, on a full load of product, 8 to 10 maybe, all right? Several years ago, USA decided they were going to fix this problem. They opened the training center, 2001. We're taking a 1% sample. I said, a 1% sample. Maybe we should take this out for a test drive first before we make our inspectors do this. Because that full load of grapes there has 2,600 lugs of grapes on it. That's 26 samples. And at the time I told the lady that was running the program, I said, Leanne, I said, the day it takes me 26 samples to determine whether that lot's good or bad, I think you should fire me. Because I obviously don't know what I'm doing if it takes me that many. I said, so the key is taking these samples from different locations. Front, back, top, bottom, sides, up, down. You can cover a lot of ground in a trailer with 8 samples if you do it that way. You know, yeah, you're going to have to move a lot on these pallets. You know, are you dealing much with RPCs? Really? Yeah, those are nice because you can clean them out, huh? They're real eco-friendly. Yeah, they're an inspector's nightmare. That's what they are. They're very heavy. Yeah, and they don't move around real easy for you to get 5 layers down on a pallet. Yeah, RPCs. Kroger handles almost exclusively RPCs. Yeah. Do you do much work for Kroger? Yeah. Well, you do. Be forewarned.
Moving to all RPCs. I said Hy-Vee's moving to all RPCs.
Are they?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess they think there's some advantage to it. You know, maybe it's cheaper in the long run. Because
it is cheaper.
You know, it definitely, you're not killing trees because, you know, you're saving on the cardboard, but and you can allegedly clean them out and sanitize them. Although I've seen some that I don't think, that's happening, but they're very difficult and unruly when you're trying to get samples. You're trying to go down 4, 5, 6 layers to get towards the bottom. But if you just take a good representative sample, yeah, you should be in pretty good shape. 8 samples. What do you guys do for a minimum?
1 per 100. So if we have 16 pallets, we'll do
You'll look
at
at,
least 1 per pallet at the very
so you'll look
least.
at up to 16.
Yeah.
I mean, the more samples you take, you're not going to hurt yourself outside of the fact that if you're spending a lot of time on load A and unfortunately load B and C are also unloading at the same time, you might not be able to spend as much time looking at those. And so, I don't know, something could get missed. You guys, how many trucks unload at one time?
No more than 3.
It could be 3. And how many inspectors do you have on the floor at any one time? Several? 1? Well, yeah. So get your roller skates, your roller blades out.
And he's not in here.
Yeah, where is he?
Yeah, and he's not even in here.
Who is it?
Right now.
Yeah, so that's a lot of moving around, 3 trucks, and I don't know, you guys pretty much control how you put the stuff away, because I know in a lot of environments, that isn't the case. Your forklift operators are, biting at the bit to put this stuff away, and so that's when a lot of stuff starts to get missed, because you're spending an extra amount of time with any one. Now, yeah, you're going to get to the point where, and I couldn't advise this more, that if you get to the point and you've calculated up your defects and you're right on a border, I would go back and take another representative, a smaller representative sample. So if I looked at 10, I would go back and maybe look at 4 more from different pallets and then recalculate based on 14. Because 1s and 6s are not your friends, trust me. That's the fastest way for a vendor, a shipper to call for a federal. Because if you're 1% out of the serious damage, and that's what you're going to base asking for, you're not going to reject it, but you're going to ask for protection, I bet. And they're going to probably bristle at that and say, well, I don't think you need any protection. It's barely out of grade. Make sure it's in, make sure it's out. Don't put it on the line. So take more samples that way. When you do look at these, now this is, if you've got great tomatoes coming in, and you don't see this very much anymore, by the way, this is the way it always used to be, bulk, you got to count out so many, and it's the same way here, but this was a lidded box, this is an unlidded container. Still, you're not going to have the time, or you never want to expend the effort to look at everything in the box. So you have to predetermine where you're going to take your sample from before you ever take it. And I don't know whether you're going to look at 25, you're going to look at 50, you may look at 100 tomatoes. But decide what section of the box you're going to start drawing from, and then stick to your guns. All right, a lot of times I've happened, say for this case of peaches, let's say there's 75 peaches in there, but I want to get through these inspections fast, so I'm going to look at only 25. I'm going to determine, before I take that lid off, where I'm going to take my sample from. So I'm going to take my 25, I'm going to start here, go to the bottom, go over. I bet you by tomorrow about 3:30, I get this. All right? Say, I'm going to go down, I'm going to go over, I'm going to stop at 25. And that's my sample. So lo and behold, I take that lid off, and remember, I'm going to start down here, and staring at me right in the upper left-hand corner are these nice 2 decayed peaches. And I can't take them. I gotta leave my hands off of them, no matter how much I want them. And boy, I've had applicants for inspections that just, like a parrot on my shoulder, they're trying to help me. Their hands are in my sample. Hey, you forgot these 2. I said, no, I didn't forget those 2. They're not in my sample. They said, great, they sent us a blind inspector today. What do you mean they're not in your sample? You can't see these? I said, yeah, I see them, but they're not in my sample. They don't get it. If I take those 2 and then only take 23 over here, I got a better idea. How about I just close everything up, put it in a rack, I'm gonna go get a cup of coffee and a donut or something.
You give me what you want.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna make up some numbers at that point. Yeah, exactly. Just make it up. Because that's about how accurate you're going to be, because you've biased your sample. you know, at some point you're gonna open that, and those two are gonna be staring in, that's gonna be in your 25, and then you can take them. And here's the other, I guess the last piece of advice. If you can't keep your hands off of them, then you have only one option. Run everything in the box. The whole box is now your sample, which for 75 is one thing. For 10,000 and whatever is in here, you know, whatever, I don't know, there's a lot of great tomatoes in there, okay? And if I'm gonna take my 50 count from here, but I see these two that are rotten, I can't touch them. You know, you gotta keep your hands off them. So be true to yourself when you're sampling, if you're sampling anything less than whole containers, okay? And then lastly is this one. Don't be afraid to use a knife. And I understand you guys have full range and authority to cut anything you need to cut and as much as you want cut. Yeah. Hallelujah. That doesn't happen a lot. Okay? A lot of companies restrict their inspectors. They won't let them cut. Because when you cut, you've destroyed the product. That we can't make money on that product anymore. So you can't take the lettuce out of the cello or the cauliflower out of the cello. You can't cut the stone fruit. We did a class a couple years ago in Indianapolis where their head of QA is kind of crafty. So whatever commodities we had, she knew what the agenda looked like. It was a 5-day class. So 2 days before each class, she would put those commodities for that day on a pallet, put them in the banana room, and gas them. And it created all kinds of defects, most of them internal. And so I'm going on, we're teaching stone fruit, we're going peaches, nectarines, plums, and I tell them how important, especially with plum, you have to cut. So we have 20 people in the class. So we break up, we've got 5 tables of 4, 5 samples, full boxes of plums. These beautiful dark purple to black plums, starting to get a little ripeness to a little give, not a mark on them, perfect looking. And I think one of the comments was, I don't know why we're wasting our time with this, we need to go on to the next commodity. There's nothing wrong with these. And not one table cut 1 plum. I said, just indulge me a little. Just cut a couple, let's see what we got, you know? And so they said, all right, so we could taste them too that way. I said, yeah, you go ahead and taste them. So they started cutting, and they cut and cut. And by the time we're done, we cut 5 full boxes of plums, and this is what we had. All of this brown to black internal discoloration. And at the end, there was 85% of it. So we went from 0% that they were going to just put it in the rack, let's stop wasting our time, to 85% that nobody would take a bite out of. And I said, boy, if we hadn't cut any of it, that would be in the rack, and now the next person that gets to take a bite out of that is the consumer who is taking it home, and now they're scratching their head like saying, boy, where did these come from? Because we're not going to buy them there anymore. We're going to shop somewhere else. So this is why you have to cut. You know, and this is like an ongoing battle that I have trying to get managers to let their inspectors cut product and destroy it. You know.
I cut a lot.
Good for you. Cut a lot, you know. Yeah, I mean, we're later today or tomorrow, we're going to talk about watermelons especially. There's another commodity that, you know, there's this alchemy out there that a lot of people are under the delusion that they can pick it up, pat it like a baby's rear end, and tell you whether there's internal defects in it or not. I don't, can you guys do that? You've been doing this a long time. And if you say you can, I can't hear it. I've never been able to hear it. Yeah, and I know one guy, the guy that runs Kroger's program, and I've known him for 35 years, and he can pick watermelons up, and he's of the opinion that he can pat and tell whether there's listen to the sound and tell whether there's an internal defect. And so he puts one down, yep, this one's got it, put it down, whacks it with that machete, opens it up, big hollow heart. And I said, yeah? I said, this one looks just as bad. Yeah, this is bad. I said, good, do it again. I want to see you do it again, you know, because I don't believe you. And you'll cut that one, and it's perfect. I said, really? How about that?
You patted the wrong part.
Yeah.
You gotta add a little bit more to the lab.
See, he always prefaces it though so that he can tell that, but he says if he ever goes to buy watermelons for like a family get-together or a picnic or whatever, he always buys 2. And I said, boy, I guess it's not that accurate, huh? Yeah. To me, there's
50%
one.
not very good.
Yeah, there's one accurate way. There's only one accurate way. There's some external indicators of some internal defects, but they're not 100% spot on, you know? And there is only one way, and that's to take that machete, that big knife, and cut the thing right in half. And that's all there is to it. And there's been a lot of watermelon inspections where I've cut 100 watermelons and made quite the mess, filled up a couple bins, garbage bins, you know? And now, the only thing, I guess, you guys don't have any problem cutting. And here's, I guess, the downside, is if you cut like you're in a slasher movie, you're starring in a slasher movie, and at the end you say, oh, by the way, we're keeping this, it's #1. I'm sorry. You going to the woodshed is well deserved on that one at that point. You know, the key is cut a couple, cut a few. If you don't find anything that's scoreable as a defect, stop cutting. And yeah, you'll have to assume some risk at that point. But to sit there and just cut, you know, like a mad person, and then find nothing, yeah, some manager.
You cut like
I
crazy.
cut.
Crazy,
within
but not a
reason,
mad person.
Within reason, and then I stopped.
You cut within
It's either
reason.
good
She
or not.
cuts crazy, but not like a mad person. See, there's a fine line with everything in life, you know. Yeah, that's all right. I say you go right on cutting. I think it's a great idea. All right. See, I get to get on a jet Friday morning. You got to stay. That's the difference.
Still keeping my knife, right?
Atta girl. You keep cutting. Stick to your guns. All right. Have you ever gotten different lots of product in, and say you get 1,000 cartons of something in, and if they're different brands, they're easy to separate, and if they're different sizes, they're easy to separate, or different varieties. Sometimes they only have, and especially in this day and age with food safety being as important as it is, they put a lot of code numbers on cartons. And sometimes you'll get product in where you'll have one code number consistently on one pallet and another code number consistently on another pallet. And then you open the boxes and the quality or the condition is drastically different between one and the other. Well, at that point, you have 2 lots there, and you are obligated to separate those lots. Same thing, a federal inspector has to separate those lots. A lot of times they would call us out to do inspections, and we would go out and they say, well, we want you to run this all together. And I would say, well, wait a minute, lot ABC got loaded with decay, and lot XYZ is perfect. No, I can count them myself because you have 6 pallets of this and 6 pallets of that. So you have 2 lots, a good lot and a bad lot. And it would piss a lot of applicants off because they want it all thrown together so it's all out of grade and they get a discount on all of it. And the thing is, the reason you're obligated to separate them is you have to understand how these packing houses work. They're taking product in from different growers, and that's really where that lot number is coming from. Well, it's not fair to the guy that, the woman that produces the good stuff to have to take a financial hit from the product that was lousy, that was on the same load. All right, so just keep that in mind that, it's easy to separate brands and varieties and sizes. It's not so easy when you're having to look for lot numbers. You get this a lot from Chile in the wintertime. There's always growers' numbers on it. And then as you get towards the end of the season, that's when you begin to have a real headache because they will put multiple growers, multiple lots on the same pallet, and everything is commingled. And at that point, you have no choice but to run everything together. Because you can't get a decent count on it. So when you can get a decent count, when you can differentiate lots, you have to separate them and get multiple inspections. Now, Lara told me yesterday you guys are doing a pretty good job of keeping track and quantifying your results. This is another one of the story I told you yesterday, working with an inspector a couple years ago out in the Southwest, a newer inspector, and we were looking at jumbo packed peaches and lots of defects, end of the season, and I'm running mine, and this company, these guys, they kept track of nothing. So how they came up with percentages was alchemy. They made it up, I think. And I'm keeping track on the inside of my peach box lid. And we're running 75 count, 78 count, 74 count, we're running whole boxes. So I get my 4 done and I know my percentages of my 4 defects. So I ask him, so what do you have here, in or out? And he says, he says, well, I think we're out. And I said, no, you don't think we're out. We're out or we're in, which one? So then he starts spouting off actual percentages. And I said, you haven't written a thing down, you've got oddball size samples, you've got 4 different defects, and now you're going to tell me exact percentages of each defect? I said, I don't think so. I said, so, yeah, you know, you just made those numbers up, and let's be honest. So let's run these and let's calculate everything. And that's the bottom line. As an inspector, you know, especially a QA inspector, there's going to be a lot of times where you're going to get stuff in and it looks perfect. There's no sense to write zeros down, you know, say, hey, the lot looks great, let's run with it. When you do start finding problems, you know, inspectors got to relay that stuff back to the buyer, because now they've got to go and tell the vendor, hey, by the way, you've got an ugly baby, and this is how ugly the baby is. You know, and this is what you have to run. You know, this is how bad it is, and this is how much protection we need because it's this bad. You know, is it 10% bad? Is it 20% bad? Is it 80% bad? You know, and if you're not keeping track of on just a cursory, just a simple note sheet or something, I don't care if you're writing on the inside of the box lid like I did with the peaches. As long as there's some record of it, you know, you can actually quantify it and then, you know, write. I don't know. Do you guys do it on a spreadsheet on the computer where everything is?
We handwrite them, and it looks very similar to that.
Okay. Okay. I know a lot of companies will just, everything is just inputted into a spreadsheet and it does all the math for them. Real simple.
We have that for in-house inspections.
That's it. Yeah. That is excellent. You know, and that way you know exactly where you stand all the time. You know, it's when you don't keep track of it, and then, well, how bad is it? Well, I need protection. Well, okay, how bad is it? And at that point, essentially you almost have to make a number up because you don't know. You haven't kept track of it. You know, happens quite a bit. You can keep track of it and just do total percentages. After you've run all your samples, you can keep track of it on an individual sample basis, and that way you can get a range and average of each defect. That's kind of how the feds keep track of it right there. Kind of a little bit more complicated way. And you see those are kind of oddball size. They're running anywhere from 33 to 40 counts, where everything on the other sheet was a 50 count. Okay, so yeah, this was something that Save-A-Lot, the chain, asked me to come up with. They said, we just need a simple note sheet. I said, what information do you want on it? And so we designed this, and they put it into a spreadsheet, and he went to his printer, and they printed out little pads, and all the inspectors, every one of their distributions, they have those on their card. So now when they have a problem, they can write everything down, take that back to their computer, you know, type up their reports, attach their pictures, and send the obligatory, you know, 100 emails that they have to send. And it makes life a lot easier. So, okay, any questions? Those are basics. Basics of inspection, basics of terminology. Again, if you want it a little bit easier, please use our website. You know, that's why we put it together. Sure easier to read than the US standards, okay? Let's move on. No questions? Try not to touch the screen anymore. I'm not going to touch it again. That's it.
I think you can lock it.
I believe that.
I was wondering about that.
Okay. All right. And this is probably what? The commodity that you look at the most here, by far. Okay. And 3 different standards we're going to talk about here. And unfortunately, the one that's used the most is by far the most complicated one. This is one where you really got to watch temperature-wise. You got to keep tomatoes at a little bit warmer temperature, enough humidity in the room. I don't know, this information isn't something that Tom and I came up with, or isn't based on experience, it's based on Blue Book. And I don't know this, you tell me this last thing. Storage life, 2 to 5 weeks on tomatoes.
No, probably.
It'd have to be pretty green.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you pick them green.
Yeah. You know, tomatoes is a completely different commodity and world now than when Tom and I started this business. At the time, whenever we would get any tomatoes in, and there were any red tomatoes in the box, that was doomed. It was an absolute disaster because everything at that point was mature green or turning, and it had to go in a room and get gassed. Well, as soon as you gas those red tomatoes, you have tomato soup. You know, and you know, the big problem. And now what I see is most everything comes in and it's either light red to red. When we were walking, did the tour yesterday, that was probably, you know, some of those lots of tomatoes in there were probably the greenest I've seen in a long time at any one location. So yeah, you guys are still getting green tomatoes in, and I don't, do you have gas rooms here at all?
No.
So you're having to warm them, put them in a warm area and color them yourself then?
And packaging room.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so the industry has changed significantly, and I don't know if it's just how they handle them or they've been monkeying with Mother Nature and the genetics, because you should be able to ship red tomatoes and have them that firm and hard and not have any loss to them.
We'll see some varieties anymore that are like as red as what's up on your screen, and you could almost smack them on the table and they won't bruise. They've done some pretty fantastic things.
Really?
Then you have other lots that are really pink and...
Well, one thing I noticed yesterday is that because of the nature of your business here, you guys handle a lot of different varieties, a lot of different brands all at the same time. I mean, I lost count of how many brands of tomatoes was in that one room. And I'm thinking, oh man, you guys got to keep up with that. Good luck. That is a job right there. Yeah, that's a lot of work to keep up with multiple brands. What was there, maybe 12 different brands of tomatoes in there? Yeah, yeah. Usually you may see 2 or 3 at most. And I walked in there and I went, oh God, poor guy. You know? The guy's got to have an alcohol problem when he gets my age. You know, you got to be kidding. You know. So
We're trying to keep away from that.
So we talk about the standards and the tolerances. Now, this is the standard that most tomatoes are graded under. Okay, the fresh tomato standard. It's been around for quite a while, about 26 years now. We also have a standard. You know, the Romas, the plums are covered under this standard. The grapes and the cherries are covered under this standard as well. Okay, and again, this is probably the most complicated, by far the most complicated. Not probably, it is. A lot of different tolerances. 4 different grades, and you know, I know everybody says, well, we buy a US #1 tomato, and boy, and I go back several years, and I know that there used to be a lot of combination grades shipped. Now, I think a lot of that could be explained if you look at the standard. The tomato standard is one that is set up where, and there's a few like this, where they'll have a set of tolerances for shipping point, and then they will have a different set of tolerances that allow a higher percentage of defects for the market. And you're on the market end of it. And so what they would do is they would grade them at, you know, under a marketing order where they had to be federally or federal state graded, like in Florida. So they would grade them down there, and they would grade them as a combination because you would only allow 10% defects, where you would allow 15% in the market. So they could ship them as a combination down there, they would have to, but by the time they left and they went even a mile down the road, they were graded under the market tolerances, and which allowed 5% more, and they would meet a #1. Every once in a blue moon, they'll ship a #2 tomato. And really, it's shape more than anything that's going to be the difference between the 1 and the 2 from what I've seen over the years. I don't know, you tell me, are you guys handling any deuces? You do handle some?
Yeah, we have some combos in right now. Also, some mixed sizes, mixed shapes, all that.
A lot of crazy shapes, yeah, you know. And then, you know, you start getting into, you handle heirlooms too, don't you?
A little bit.
You know, and there's something that, it's been a controversial subject, and especially as they've increased in popularity and the market shares increased for heirlooms. It's very tough for an heirloom tomato to meet even a #3 grade, and it's basically because of the crazy shape and the huge cat face scars that are on the bottom of them. They just won't make it. One of the big vendors in Philadelphia, Joe Procacci, there's a guy you really want to mess with. Procacci. Uh-huh, yeah. Every time I went into his place, I looked at my bed the next morning for a horse's head. But, yeah.
I think he's still working, isn't he?
Oh, yeah. But I think his son J.M. runs the show
Yeah.
now, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, I only did one inspection by myself in Philly at Procacci's, and by the time I was done, I walked down their row of metal steps and wasn't even out the warehouse, and my boss was walking in the door. Let's look at that product again. And then I never went back, which didn't bother me at all. But Procacci got himself involved, a big financial stake in a lot of land, and he patented a variety. I think they were called ugly ripes of heirloom tomatoes. And he was growing them in Florida, and he was going to clean up like everything Procacci's ever touched, he's cleaned up. Okay? Well, they have this marketing agreement in Florida that says that if your product doesn't meet a US #1 grade, you can't ship it out of the state of Florida. So basically the Florida Tomato Committee was telling him, well, yeah, you can grow all the ugly ripes you want, but they don't meet #1 because of the scars and the shape, so you can't ship any out of the state of Florida.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Procacci just simply sued the Florida Tomato Committee and the USDA because they were party to the marketing agreement. And he won. And they said, so now, if it's a heirloom tomato, there's like a US #1 with an asterisk by it. You know, this shape and scars and I think softness, you know, don't apply to the requirement to ship it out of the state. Yeah, which that doesn't surprise me. He won. He was gonna, as far as I'm concerned, he wins all the time. It's just easier that way. You know, Procacci.
You don't have your legs broken that way.
Yeah, that's what I want to do. I'm a little bit too old to be kneecapped. Yeah, exactly. So, so here are the tolerances at market now for this standard, the one that you're using most of the time. So you've got this 15% total defects, and then it has a lot of things that's included under that 15%. It maxes out 10% for the shoulder bruises, the SDA. There's a maximum of 10 for all the other defects. And then because you have this #3 grade in there, you have a very serious damage that does not include soft and decay. So that's kind of different because normally your decays are included in your serious or your very serious damage. In this case, it isn't. So you've got 5% very serious damage by things like scarring and insect damage, things like that. And then you have an entirely separate 5% tolerance for soft and or decay. So they've taken these two defects and they've lumped them into one. So if I've got 5% decay, I can have no % soft, you know, and so on and so forth. It's a total of 5. Now this standard is probably, no, it's not probably, it's definitely, I don't think there's any other standard that has a 5% decay tolerance. Usually they're much lower than that. So there's a lot of wiggle room here. And then, like with all standards, the way they're set up, you have a separate tolerance for sizing, for off-size in this case. Now, you know, this is another thing that used to be, sizing and color used to be a huge deal with tomatoes. And I don't think it is anymore. If you get the wrong size, you just got shipped the wrong product, and it's going to be consistently off-size. There's not going to be you're not going to worry, well, do I have 8%, 10%, 12%? No, you're going to have 100% because they just sized it wrong and they shipped you the wrong shipment, the wrong boxes. You know, and I've seen that machine you have out there, which I think is just as slick as it gets. That's why coloring and sizing and things like that is a moot point anymore, because it's all done by computers. You know, they've taken the human element out of it. And so, does everything you guys have run across that machine you showed me, or is it just the bigger stuff like that? Okay. Your Romas aren't going across it? Is there a way to run Romas across it?
Not effectively. They get two into a cup, so then they'll see one is green and one is red, and
okay.
two get a cup, and then it dumps both at the red. So
okay.
we've sampled with it. It'll run peppers pretty well. So if you have like a lot that has suntan, I mean, you can strip suntan out.
Okay.
So it has other capabilities. A lot of citrus houses use that type of machine as well.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I've seen it with those types of machines with a lot of different commodities. Apples, you know, with coloring of apples, they do that now. I saw it up in Grand Rapids, Michigan a couple summers ago. They were running, it was a blueberry house. And so they had this system set up that not only sized the blueberries, but the electric eyes picked up the color, and if it didn't have a dark enough blue color, an air shot out the poorly colored stuff into a coal bin. It was pretty cool, pretty slick. It's pretty expensive too, but you know, to set it up, but it very effective. Okay. You know, I'm gonna just show you what the good delivery tolerances is. You know, I gave Lara a thumb drive that has all of these presentations are on it. So you guys can run off as many of these as you want, okay? Without having to take a lot of notes. And the PA stuff will be on there. I guess the thing to note here is just when PACA gets involved with their good delivery tolerances, the percentages usually go way up. And what PACA is looking at with good delivery tolerances is condition type defects. They couldn't care less about sizing. They couldn't care less about quality type defects. Good delivery tolerances were put into place long before I ever started in this business, and it was because way back in the day, most of this product was not shipped by refrigerated semi, it was shipped in rail cars, where they actually either had to have an ice bunker in it or a wood-fired bunker to keep it warm in the wintertime, you know, and it took a lot longer to get across the country. So they said, well, we're going to have to allow some wiggle room for the defects. And they put these good delivery tolerances in place. Now, one thing that none of my stuff reflects yet, last year the PACA kind of pulled a fast one, and most companies don't know, anybody involved doesn't know this, but there's not just one set of good delivery tolerances anymore. Before you could go onto their website and say, you know, Google PACA good delivery, you could spit out like a 5-page document. So for every commodity, there's a standard, there's an associated PACA good delivery tolerance. Now you go on and it spits out about a 30-some page document, because each commodity now, the good delivery tolerance is based on how many days the product's been in transit. What I'm showing you is the maximum of 4 to 5 day transit. If it's only been in transit 1 day, it's a lot closer to the actual grade now. And I think that had to be the work of somebody like United Fresh or, you know, the produce PMA. Somebody like that had to get involved and say, look, you know, these things are kind of outdated and outmoded. You got to do a little bit better job and give our receivers a break, you know. So then we have this. It seems like these are becoming more and more popular all the time. Probably because there's a nice price advantage to them. You know, they're pricey. Good product, very tasty. These tomatoes on the vine, the cluster tomatoes, and the tolerances are much tighter than the fresh tomato. You only have, it's 10 total, includes 5 serious, includes 2 decay. You also have how many, you know, if you had any tomato individually by itself, has its own separate tolerance of 10, all right? If there's any defect of the vine itself, like if they're brown or brittle or anything like that, that counts as a defect. And then if the decayed affects the vines themselves or the stems, there's a separate tolerance all by itself. I've never known sizing to be an issue with this product, but how many tomatoes are attached to the vine is usually the kicker. Some companies require 3, some require 4. I've seen one require 5, and they'll build that into their own specs. Okay, and I guess that's, you guys, when you're selling to a lot of different entities, like what are your 2 major grocery store chains right here?
Fairway.
Okay, do they have their own specs, or do they all buy on US #1?
Every customer we have kind of has their own opinion about things should go.
Okay.
Certain colors, certain sizes.
Yeah, and, you know, and I'm finding most of the grocery store chains now are coming up with specs that I guess the best way to describe them would be US #1 plus. It's plus something, and the plus usually involves some kind of sizing or some kind of coloring, you know, or something that's, or what they'll do is they'll take these tolerances and they'll cut them down. One company has gone to about 0 decay tolerance on everything, which means, yeah, it's their discretion that if they find any decay in their inspection, they could theoretically reject the load. And I'm thinking, I don't,
You're across the street from your distributor.
That's all the stuff we get. A lot of rejected loads anymore. I mean, they just reject the whole thing
right.
and it looks good.
Yeah, and a lot of times, what's happened in the past, and we saw this start about the time that we started doing the industry classes in Fredericksburg when we were still with USDA, and at the time, Walmart was it was the 900-pound gorilla. You know where the 900-pound gorilla sits? Anywhere it wants. And essentially, what they would do is they had their own spec, and in a nutshell, what that was the U.S. standard cut in half, cut all the tolerances in half, and that was Walmart spec. But that still didn't mean anything, because if they got in, let's say their buyers had overbought, the thought was that they could still reject it. And if the vendor said, well, wait a minute, this is exactly what you ordered, it's no defects, or if it meets PACA good delivery, you have to take it. Oh, we have to take it? Okay, we'll take it, and we won't buy anything else from you. We'll go somewhere else. And that's kind of it's almost what opened the door now for all of these bigger companies. They've all pretty much done the same thing. They don't get the PACA involved. There's not a whole lot of federal inspections done. It's like, look, this is our spec. Meet it or else. I watched one company put an entire load of potatoes back on a trailer, full load, last year because the potatoes had peeper sprouts on them, little peepers, which the USDA doesn't even consider a defect. It's not a defect. And I said, you're rejecting those. They said, yeah, we don't take any peepers. I said, oh. I said, now, if the guy calls for federal on that, the certificate's going to say 0 defects, 0 checksum US #1. And they said, yeah, we know. They're not going to call for a federal on it, because if they do, we'll find another potato shipper.
Yeah, they have all the leverage.
It's getting horrible.
And it's very frustrating because they are completely violating the law and violating the...
Absolutely.
And they have a gun to your head.
They've completely circumvented the PACA and the inspection service. Absolutely, and it is a 180-degree flip-flop. All right, it's...
What can you do then? Can't a government agency step in? And, that's what PACA was set up to do.
PACA was set up to do that. See, and that's just it. The inspection service doesn't really have any authority whatsoever, and PACA is the cops of the industry. And they are set up for fair trade. And I guess the only thing you could do would be to go to PACA and complain. And and then the first thing.
If they won't buy from you, then they'll never buy from you again.
Exactly. They got you. That's as simple as that. They've got you. There's a lot of vendors.
You just have to tack it onto your price.
Last year we did in fact, about a year and a half ago, we did a class for Amazon because they were getting into the produce business, Amazon Fresh. And so it's the only class Tom and I have ever done together since we started IPT. They wanted both of us. Okay. So we did the class for them, and at the end we sat down with their buyers and their merchandisers, and they talked, and I said, why haven't you created your own specs? And the one young lady looked at me and says, well, our volume isn't such that we feel we have the right to create our own spec.
Really?
The right. I said, did you happen to see the name on the outside of this building when you drove in today?
Yeah. What?
Amazon? I
Yeah,
said,
I've never
you
heard that
guys,
before from a big corporation.
I said, you're the tallest hog at the trough and everything. Everything you touch turns to gold.
Why were
What
they
do
bothering
mean?
with you?
Yeah, I said, you could set whatever spec you want, and your vendor is going to line, there are going to be vendors lining up because they know what the potential is here. It's going to take off, and they could be shipping you thousands of loads a year. And so it's up to you. And they said, well, we're going to wait and see, and we'll see how it goes. So 10 months later, they called me last fall, and they say, yeah, their head of QA says, we're really having trouble putting these specs together. We've tried, and I said, well, how many specs are you trying to put together? 113. And I said, well, first off, you don't need that many, all right? So how many have you got done in the last 10 months since we last visited this? Well, we've got 2 drafts done, and we were thinking about starting to run them, see what you charge us to run them by you to review. I said, well, I got only one problem with that. 113, you've got 2 done in 10 months. I'm only going to live so long. You know, she says, well, then we can go with option B and just have you write them and then we'll review them. I said, Dad, now, yeah. So in 2 months' time, we got the 113 down to 78. And they've got them all. And they've got scoring guide books to go along with every one of their specs. Now, I haven't heard a word from them because I still think, I said, now, there's two parts to this. Number one, creating the spec is only half of it. The other half is getting the vendor or the vendors to buy into it, which I still think you probably will. But see, they wanted things done a lot differently. They wanted to change the scoring guidelines as well. Because they said, look, we know we're going to have a high turnover of our inspectors. So we need it simple. Our scoring guidelines are 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch. That's it. No 3/8, 5/8, 10% of the surface. It's too confusing. We're not going to do any sugar testing. We're not going to do any pressure testing. And we want everything done by count, not weight. Even, we don't care what the US standard says. I said, that is a pretty radical change. I said, I'll do my best. There's a couple commodities. There's no way in hell I'm going to be able to set them up on count. Snap beans, grapes, no. You got to do them on weight.
What, they do they count by a range of count? Like, they got to be 45 to 55, or?
What they wanted to do is all the defects by count. So let's say if you've got, instead of weighing onions or potatoes, and face it, most of the time when you buy, if you buy a 70 count potato or a size A potato, I mean, you'll have some variance in range there, but most of the potatoes are the same size or relatively the same size in the container. They were going to just count out potatoes and then count the defects from there and base their percentages on count instead of weighing everything. They didn't want to weigh anything. And I said, okay, I mean, we could set it up that way, you know, but you know, you still have to end up selling this to your vendors because you're scoring the defects a lot differently than the feds are scoring it.
Yeah.
And one thing is if you ever come up with your own spec and you get a federal inspection called, you have to provide a hard copy, at least the first time, of that spec to the federal inspector, and they'll grade it to your spec. You know, it could meet US #1 but fail Amazon Fresh spec. You know, and their spec gets attached with the certificate just like the note sheet does.
Yeah, as long as the vendor agreed to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, and that's really what you guys are faced with now, because all of these entities that you're now selling this product to, they're all moving the bar on you, and you got to know, well, so who is this load going to today, because their bar is set here, and if this load is going to that company, well, now their bar is set here, and I'm going to have to really rework the product a little bit differently for the next customer as I did the first customer. You know, and that's really what is, I think, maddening now about what you guys do. You've got a moving target every day.
Yeah.
You know, and you're absolutely right. There is nothing, if you want to stay in business, there's nothing you can do about it. I wish I had different news, but no. And years ago, everybody played by the PACA's rules, and it was even worse then because the shippers had the leverage, and they said, oh yeah, it doesn't make #1, but it meets good delivery. You still got to take it, and if you don't take it, the PACA is going to be breathing down your neck, and they'll make you pay me for it, and make you take it. And that's the way that went. And boy, it sure isn't that way any longer. Okay, so yeah, the world's changed quite a bit. Okay, I don't even know if you guys are using this set of standards at all, these tolerances for the greenhouse. I'm pretty sure you bring in greenhouse tomatoes. This is a tough one because the tomatoes on the vine are greenhouse tomatoes, for the most part. All right. I don't know how you differentiate between, or how do you tell me how you differentiate between tomatoes on the vine, which is a greenhouse, and this standard, and your actual greenhouse tomatoes. And is anything I'm looking here right now, are these greenhouse tomatoes? Any of these?
Yeah, the greenhouse would be the loose ones that come from a hothouse.
Yeah.
So it would be more.
It'd be that
Up front, I
one.
think they're the greenhouse.
That one there, that'd be your greenhouse one.
Those are the
That
greenhouse, the
you'd
ones
use
that
those standards, yeah.
that are in the place pack there.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So you'll see this the set of tolerances you have to work with is much tighter for the greenhouse, all right? And this is the way I wish they were all set up, by the way. 10, 5, and 1, and then you have, you know, your off-size tolerances, which in a place pack, you're not gonna worry about. All right. How much are you guys actually physically sizing using these silly things? Nothing, okay. And how about with peppers or anything else? Just so I know? Good, because I'm putting those away then. That's
Well,
it.
I will say though, a few times that we went into Walmart and we actually had a vendor that was coming to us to help them get it to Walmart, we used them a lot. Because they were rejecting it if it was outside of what their standards said. So we would actually put like a zucchini through the hole to make sure it would fit, because, okay, it can only be this
Yes.
diameter.
Well, and that's kind of what we talked about earlier. I think it was right before you got here when we were talking about a lot of times they'll buy summer squash on a fancy grade, and it has something to do with minimum or maximum
Yep.
diameter. And a lot of these stores, what they're looking for consistency too. They want consistent product that's very close. We ran into, even the bigger stores ran into this last year with all the stone fruit from California. They used to have one of these marketing agreements in place where the product had to be a certain size, even in trade packs where they're shipping a count, but it had to be within a certain size range. So what they're looking for is like uniformity of size of the fruit. Well, they did away with the marketing agreement. And it's kind of like, cats away, the rats are going to play, And so some of these shippers decided they were going to put all different sizes of plums and nectarines in those trays. And some of the grocery store chains called them out on it and said, okay, here's our new spec. And they gave, if it was, I don't know, it wasn't even a quarter of an inch difference between the smallest and the largest. They say, just because you don't have a marketing agreement that's policing you, now we're going to have to police you. And if you're outside of our size range, we're rejecting it. And we're not taking it. Because they don't want to put little fruit on the same shelf at the store as the big stuff and have them compete with one another on the same rack. They want everything consistent. I get it, but, okay. I'm not even gonna mess with the sizing thing. Outside of the fact, just understand with tomato sizing in that fresh tomato standard, that whether you're looking at them as small, medium, larges, or extra larges, or whether you're looking at them as 5x6s, 4x5s, 6x6s, whatever, there usually is an overlap in sizes. Now this is the only standard I think that does this. You can see in this, there's this overlap by a 32nd of an inch, and if you go to some of the Florida sizing, the 6x7, 6x6s, etc., there's a 2/32 inch or a 16th inch overlap. And the reason they did that is because there's so much water in these things that during transit, they would tend to get smaller, all right? And this kind of goes back to a PACA issue, when you look at branding. PACA doesn't give a rip what anybody puts on a box or a container, but what is on there had best be accurate, especially when it comes to a grade, a net weight, or a size. And that's where tomato shippers at one point, many moons ago, were saying, we're really running into a problem of potentially having a PACA misbranding violation and a subsequent fine because we're having, the product is shrinking in transit. So, if we're running the diameter too close to the line and it shrinks, now I'm undersized and I've exceeded my undersized tolerance, I'm out of grade and I'm misbranded. So they changed the standard to allow for the overlap. It's the only one that overlaps the sizing. Again, I don't know how much, it doesn't sound like you're doing too much sizing of it. You're whatever it says on the box, you're going with it, and that's...
We count
Take
it.
a look, yeah. Well, it's based on count, so if it's X to X, that should be a large size.
Okay. And that's what most companies now, they've kind of gotten away from measuring diameters and lengths and things like that, and it's more of an issue of, okay, how many do I have in the container? And they've got their own parameter of if I want 48 in the container, well then I can go down to 45 and go up to 52, and that's my range. Anything out of that, now I've got a problem. Okay, and that's something you generally will never find in a standard either. That's individual companies' preferences and specs. all right? Colors, same way. I mean, we used to break this thing down. You'd lump them together. Green to breakers, turning to pink, light red to red. You'd throw in your percentage of, and you'd round those to the nearest 5%, throw in your percentage of salt, add your percentage of decay, and as long as you came up with between 98 and 102%, you were in business. Every single tomato inspection. It doesn't matter, grape tomatoes, cherries, Romas, they were all done this way. And now when they come in, I don't, do you guys specify color at all on tomatoes? Or
Yeah.
it's whatever they get, whatever you get and you work with?
For the most part.
You're talking about with our vendors or with our customers?
Well, I know your vendors are specifying they want a certain color
Right.
specifically, but you just take whatever you get in, right, and work with it.
For the most part, and then depending on in-houses and stuff, we'll get protection on stuff that has more color or defects and stuff. Yeah.
Well, Joe usually on his tomatoes, his gas tomatoes, he'll tell them he wants them stage 5 and 6 before they get on a truck. Or, you know, if he needs a little more leg room, he'll say, you know, ship them at a stage 4.
Okay.
You know, so he does.
Okay, all right. All right. Yeah, and boy, yeah, it breaks it down. But I don't think you guys are breaking down anywhere close to what USDA would break it down or used to break it down to, okay? All right, now, all the defects we talk about are based on a 2.5-inch diameter tomato. And remember, you got a lot of little tomatoes that are graded under that first fresh tomato standard. So, yeah, you're gonna have to allow a lot less. That correspondingly lesser or greater areas, well now we're correspondingly lesser, and it's a lot lesser when we're looking at something like a grape tomato. You really got to get, you know, your defects, you don't allow much of it before it's scored as a defect. Okay, first thing is maturity. Normally you never have a problem with maturity in any product. You know, and because it's green doesn't mean it's immature. They usually pick these mature green and then they gas them. Okay, and as long as they develop this jelly in these seed cavities, at least 2 of the seed cavities have this jelly in it, then you're good to go. They consider that a mature tomato. If they pick them early and the tomato hasn't developed that enough jelly inside in the, what they call the locules, you could gas that forever and it's never going to ripen up, ever. It won't ripen. And that's usually the thing is when you look at every one of these standards, and they, you know, you say that the definition of what mature or immature is, you know, maturity is that it's reached that stage of development that you can harvest it and it will continue to ripen, you know, it will eventually ripen. Where if you've picked it immature, it's usually, in this case, it would be scored because you have a very serious damage tolerance, it would be scored against that 5% tolerance, all right? And it's usually on other standards that don't have a very serious limit, it would be scored against the serious damage tolerance. And it's simply because you've got an unusable product. And it really doesn't matter what, it's not just tomatoes, it's all product. If it's immature, it's a serious damage type defect against a restricted tolerance. Okay, it won't ripen. Scarring is very common. And again, when we start looking at aggregate areas, here, you know, for a 2.5-inch tomato, you're allowed up to 3/8 inches of scarring. So you'd have to take all the scars on the surface and see if it would fit inside that 3/8. Well, here we got just one big scar, all right? And we've got a little bit of overlap down here and a little bit of, I did it again, overlap up top. And you got a little bit of scarring over here as well. And you have to put all of that, you know, in your head, see if you can move the circle and see if it would exceed that 3/8. I'm going to say that what I'm looking at right there does not exceed the 3/8, provided there's none on the other side of that tomato. All right, and that is the whole premise of aggregating defects right there. All right, now would that big scar materially detract? So here's where we run into the problem. Okay, technically that isn't a scorable scar. But I look at that big scar on that tomato and I'm thinking, as the consumer now, am I buying it?
Depends on the price.
Depends on the consumer.
Good, Dan, that's a pretty good, and it depends on the consumer. My wife would pick it up and run with it. If the price is right, you'd pick it up and run with it.
Yeah.
I would not. I would not. I would not.
If the price is, if all the tomatoes on the table look, you know, are they all the same price and that one has a scar on it, the one next to it doesn't, that one doesn't get picked up as far as I'm concerned. And you peel that off and you've got good tomato. You're going to peel it anyway. But yeah, think about how people buy this product. You know, the standards aren't set up for anything but, number one, they're a common trade language. So if you order a number one product and I'm the shipper, I know what you want and you know what to expect because of that standard. And that's really the only thing that standard is good for. Other than that, it has nothing to do with what? Taste, nutrition, flavor, wholesomeness, nothing. It's a beauty contest. That's all it is. You know, unfortunately, it's a beauty contest. We buy with our eyes, and think of how many products we buy with our eyes where we're probably shorting ourselves by doing it. Think of ambering and grapes. Nobody wants green grapes that are turning yellow. Big mistake. Yeah, they taste better, don't they? Yeah, big mistake. Yeah, nobody wants those potatoes with the built-in pocket for my sour cream and butter in it. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that underneath that divot. Nothing. Yeah, see? We're all buying with our eyes, okay? Yeah, that wouldn't even be close to hitting the 5/8. So as we go down the line, each grade, we allow a bigger area to be defective, okay? Another type of scar, and this is one that's caused by pollination issues, or lack thereof. All right, it's called a zipper scar. And basically what you're allowed here is for one line to go from the stem to the bottom, to the blossom end. Anything more than that, and it's a defect. So the one on the right is one exact line, and here's another one where you have to aggregate. So the one on the left, you've got two zipper scars coming down from the blossom, but if you put them both together, it would only equal one going from top to bottom, and that would be okay. And I think this is a pretty common defect in loose tomatoes.
I know.
Okay? Zipper, it's pollination more than anything, okay? Growth cracks. You know, I don't see as many of these in this is to me is more of your own private garden in your backyard issue than it is for mass-produced tomatoes and shipped tomatoes. All right? The key here, one thing you're looking for is how deep the growth crack is and how fresh the growth crack is. And normally all you have to do is pick that tomato up in your hand. See if I can find one of these that isn't ready to explode on me. Okay. Pick that tomato up in your hand, and if I've got a growth crack, all I can do is give it a little squeeze, and if that's fresh and I see tomato juice coming out of it, then it's a serious damage type defect. All right, it's a fresh crack instead of just a growth crack. The other thing is you're looking at how long the cracks are and whether they're radial, whether they go around the top, and that's really where you're going to see it. And now here's an idea of just how ridiculous this can get when you're an inspector. That is the scoring guideline up there on the screen for a growth crack in fresh tomatoes. Who on earth can remember all that? It's ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah, that the industry would come and say, well, this is all the criteria to score it. And oh, by the way, we know we have a growth crack, and where they're normally going to happen is up in the stem area. So anything that's within the stem scar itself, you don't get to count that. Yeah, that's gratis. We get that for free because that's where we have the most problem with growth cracks. Other than that, if it's out on the tomato, now you can score it, but it has to be so long, so deep, it can't be fresh, blah, 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 on and on. Look, if it materially detracts, it's a defect, you know, and you're going to have to pull it out. And, you know, like with a lot of growth cracks, it's usually an issue of too much rain and too much fertilizer and the product growing too fast. And it just almost like grows itself right out of its skin. Some other commodities, we look at this defect and they would call it, instead of growth cracks, they'll call it something like burst. You see that in cabbage, in Brussels sprouts, in lettuce, things like that. Okay, so it really is, it's too much water and too much fertilizer and too much heat then causes the thing to grow too fast, and that's when it starts cracking. This is what you usually see in the garden though. And when we talk about radial growth cracks, these are radial, the ones that go around the top of the stem scar. If you're going to see anything that comes in, the one on the upper right is the one you'll see. I highly doubt you'll ever see the others.
Yeah, my garden definitely has that one lower right.
Yeah, and you know something, this is one where you look at that, you pull them out of your garden, you think, boy, that's really ugly, you know, and if I was in a store, I'd run past it, I wouldn't walk past it. But you know in your garden you're picking that off and how sweet that's going to be. So you got to get the knife out and do the surgery and get that growth crack out of there, because the reward is the rest of the sweet tomato.
Yeah, my wife just cans them.
Yeah, or that, yeah, cook with them and yeah, you'll be done. Who cares?
Right.
Yeah, you ever go into I'm sure you have, into a fresh products for processing facility, like where they take fresh tomatoes and they're making salsa or tomato paste, or baby food, where they're taking fresh pears or something, and yeah, they think baby food. It's got to be perfect product. It's going for baby food. Wow. Yeah, it's sick. You know, I watched them do the tomatoes up in Pennsylvania several years ago, and it was at a place where they were making spaghetti sauce and salsa. And I watched the inspector, and they were going through the tomatoes that were coming in, and the tomatoes were cut up and cracked and rotten and soft. And I saw him take 2 fingers, and he scooped out this hunk of decay and say, "No, that's not enough, that's okay."
No.
And I went, "Oh boy, you know, that's so much for spaghetti or my BLT tonight, you know, I'm not gonna have that." It's sickening, you know, and, but they say in the processing, the heat and everything kills the bacteria, so you're good to go. Yeah, you don't really want to know what's in our food. Yeah, or you'll,
Don't go to a meat plant.
yeah, you'll stop eating.
Don't
That's
go
it.
to the turkey plant
Okay.
and make your hot dogs.
Oh, yeah, hot dogs, yeah, we'll talk about hot dogs.
Yeah.
And the last type of scar we'll talk about are cat faces, which are real common. In fact, it's hard to find an heirloom tomato that doesn't have a cat face. All right, and these are big, deep scars on the blossom and the bottom of the tomato. And a lot of times, huh?
Is that a possum?
Those aren't possums, those are cats. Those are cat faces. Yes. They're not possum faces, they're cat faces. Making fun of my cats?
Alice in Wonderland on the bottom.
Yeah, right.
And here's what, I mean, these are heirloom type shapes, heirloom type tomatoes, and you see these big, dark, deep cuts. Now, you know, or these scars. Now, sometimes you do have to cut into these, and you want to see how deep these scars go into the tomato, because a lot of times they'll basically eat their way into the locules, and almost like it petrifies them inside. And you don't have any meat of the tomato, it's all scar tissue inside. It's like a big scar that goes internally into the tomato. Really common, especially on the heirlooms. And you really, I would say on the heirlooms, you have to ignore them. Or you'd have 100% defects, or 95% defects, every load. So that has to be ignored, okay? And I'll let you read it. Those are all the possible causes of cat faces. And I would add one more. It's just the nature of the beast when it comes to heirlooms. That's part of the makeup of heirloom tomatoes. They have cat face scars on the blossom end. Simple. We used to say when we really didn't know what caused anything, if you say anything with a straight enough face, you can get most people to believe you. So if you look at them just straight in the eye and say, well, what causes that? It's boron deficiency. It sounds good, doesn't it? Yeah. I have no idea what that means. And I bet you see a slide or two that actually, that's one of the causes of some of these defects is boron deficiency. I have to laugh when I see it, because I have no idea what that is. I have no clue. 40-some years in, I still don't know what a boron deficiency is. You know, but it sounds good. You know, it sounds like, well, it's just an ugly scar. What causes it? It sounds better than I don't know. And the truth is, I don't know. All right. This is the cat faces. All you're allowed is like a little half-inch circle. Well, you saw how big some of those cat faces were. You'd score every one of them on heirlooms. All right. Bug damage. Yeah, that little stink bug guy. They like to get on there, and other type of bugs. And you see these little cloudy, these little circles. Some of them have like a little, you can see where the stinger went in, and what they do is they'll get on and they'll rasp on the skin of the tomato, and it kind of bleaches it out and causes these little rings. And again, these sting marks, if you think there's enough of them there that detract from the appearance, you score it as a defect. Wormholes is kind of a different story. Yeah, those would be one. A lot of stings on the one on the upper right. It's really discolored the fruit. Worms. Do you guys handle insects or treat insects the same way? Like I know most of the chains, they have a policy. There's any live insect and that load is subject to rejection because they're not going to let them in there. You know, yeah, you're going to find an occasional bug here and there, but what they're looking is real bad infestation from like aphids or thrips or worms or something like that.
Yeah, we don't want to bring them in the facility. We've had a couple like that. I mean, if a couple's not a big deal, but yeah, if it's infested.
Reject it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got to deal something with it. We had a load, one of our clients had a load of leaf lettuce here about 2 months ago, and he sent me the pictures, and I've never seen this kind of aphid infestation in my life. I mean, it was crawling. The boxes were crawling. They took 2 pallets off the box, opened up 2 boxes, put them all right back on the truck, and closed the truck up and said, see ya. Go somewhere, get it fumigated, and then good luck. You know, protein and lettuce. What the hell? It says a lot of dead bugs in there.
Oh.
Hundreds, thousands probably.
Oh.
Yeah, loaded with little green crawling bugs. And they're alive. They were going to town. You know. So here, this is a fungal defect called ghost spot. Kind of looks like the insect stings we saw from that stink bug a minute ago, only these aren't going to have a bullseye in the center of them, where the stinger went in. Okay, they say sunlight will kill it off. You know, I don't think it's one of those defects you're going to see a whole lot of. This is a different story for both tomatoes and peppers. Real common defect, bacterial spot. And in tomatoes, you've got one that's like, I want to say it's the little brother. This one called bacterial speck. All right, one looks like you took a pepper shaker and shook pepper on the tomatoes. These form big, deep splotches. Now, I guess this would be a good place to say, look, just as a word of advice. When you see a defect and you don't know what it is, you can always describe it. You know, sometimes you do a lot more damage by naming the defect and misnaming it than just describing it. Because sometimes when you name the defect, you point the finger at where it started, whether it was in the orchard or whether it was on the trailer or other, you know, wherever. And if that didn't happen, somebody is going to take one heck of a financial hit for you misclassifying the defect. We used to have to name decays with USDA. You know, I couldn't even spell half of them. I can't even say them. Phytophthora rot, bacterial soft rot, you know, all these, you know, cladosporium rot. You know, the names are this long and you can hardly say them, but we had to name decays. And when I first came on over from being a grain inspector, I said, wait a minute, I'm a business major. I'm not a pathologist. I take biology or physiology. What are we doing naming decays? And further, in early stages, a lot of these decays look alike because they haven't developed any type of mold growth. Nope, we're going to name decays. So I did this, named the decays, and I had peaches one day, and I had gray mold rot that hadn't developed any gray mold yet. So all it was a big brown rotten spot. And there's a defect in the handbook. I'd only been doing the job 3 months, called brown rot. It's rot, it's brown, ergo, it's brown rot. That's what I wrote it up as. What I didn't realize is brown rot originates in the orchard. And so I just sent the grower packing. I put him in a big, and he called for a federal inspection. And I got reversed real quick on that one. You know, and it was woodshed time. You know, who taught you how to identify decay in stone fruit? Well, sir, you did, but this is my whole point. We shouldn't be naming them, you know. And about 5 years later, USDA stopped naming. Now it's if you see a certificate, it's early, moderate, and advanced stage decay. What kind of decay is it? you figure that out. It's decay. We're not gonna name it, okay? And I would name it. So always, again, here's the spot, and here's the speck. Big difference in what they look like, okay? Too much rain, too much humidity. And the bacterial spot will affect peppers just the same way it affects tomatoes. And will look exactly the same, okay? Here's one where you do have a good external indicator of an internal problem. These puffy tomatoes. It almost looks like if you hold that tomato up with the stem in the palm of your hand and look at it, it's not a round tomato like it's supposed to be. It almost looks like a stop sign. Look how angular it is. All right, and it's because you have these open air spaces inside. All right, tomatoes will be a lot lighter too because there's not a lot of meat inside that tomato. There's a lot of air. Okay. Yeah, pollination, I don't know, I'm surprised boron deficiency isn't in this one as well. A lot of different reasons tomatoes can be puffy. This is actually a picture out of the standard. USDA still uses a lot of drawings and a lot of pictures that I'm pretty sure came over on the boat with Columbus. They're pretty old, it's old stuff, you know. But this is, if you've got an open space in at least one seed cavity that detracts from the appearance, you can score it as a defect. All right, and that's kind of like the guideline right there. You don't need a whole lot of it. Let's face it, when you cut a tomato, you want it to be nice and full and meaty inside and not full of air. Okay? How many times do we see this? Skin checks. It's essentially, it's a free from defect if the tomatoes are green or breaking, because you can see it a lot better and it looks a lot worse. So any amount of skin checks, if they're readily apparent, you can tell they're skin checks. And this almost looks like somebody took a pencil and poked around the top of the tomato, and you have these little dark spots. As the tomato colors up, you have to allow a little bit of it. Okay. I'm going to say this is the most common defect you're going to find in fresh tomatoes, bar none. And it's why it has its own separate tolerance, you know, a 10% tolerance, is shoulder bruises. And yeah, when you start getting this to this stage, you want to start poking around a little bit with your thumb, put a little pressure on those to make sure you don't like lose your thumb inside it. It's already started to rot. All right, you want to make sure that you still have a defect and not a decay defect. What you see a lot, you got to look close sometimes as they color up, are these little indentations at the top. I don't know if you have as much of it these days with the place packs. Seemed like a lot of this was caused as the fruit ripened and you had them in jumbo packs. With the weight and the bouncing around of the product, you ended up with shoulder bruises. Okay. Bruising, yeah, I guess here you're looking mostly just at the external size of the bruise itself. If it looks like it got punched in. You guys ever see this?
Yeah.
Rears its head every so often. I don't think it's regular. It'll like go in spurts. This defect has changed names at least 3 times that I know of. When I first started, we called this virus modeling. And we had a real bad case of it back, I would say late 80s, early 90s, where a lot of tomatoes had it. And boy, the shippers didn't like the term virus modeling, so at that time they wanted to change. So the USDA changed the name to irregular ripening. And the problem is that they had most of the USDA's inspectors so spooked that they were essentially scoring everything that was going from a turning to pink to a light red to a red. They were scoring it as irregular ripening when it was the natural ripening process. And I'm thinking, you know, at the time I was in DC in field operations, and wait a minute, our inspectors are causing more problem out there than they're helping with, you know? And I said, so how about we put out there, look, as long as the inspector knows as best they can that it is irregular ripening, if it looks like it just could be the normal ripening process, then they shouldn't score it at all. The kicker here is when you get these marked, blotchy, striped patterns, it almost looks like the old, the red, white, and blue ABA basketballs. Well, these are just red and green striped tomatoes. The green area, I don't care how warm you keep them, I don't care how much you gas them, they will never, ever turn red. And so irregular ripening then morphed itself to this, what they call it now, abnormal coloring. Now I saw some of the, when we went yesterday, I saw some that I would guess that they may be this, but I wouldn't be for sure, so I don't know that I would score them, unless I would be absolutely certain. See, there is a definite marked difference there, and you see how striped they are. That is abnormal coloring. All right? The one on the far left is the normal ripening process, and you see how blotchy the other ones are. And what I saw there yesterday, I thought it was aromas I saw it, they looked more like this. They were this blotchiness. I'm thinking, boy, that, I haven't seen that in a while, you know? Kind of like, and I don't know whether...
I wonder if rain causes it or excessive, because they had a lot of rain on those areas.
Well, I'm going to show you the list, the laundry list of what they think causes it. And you know what, and I'm still going to go back to what I was taught when I first started, way back when, is that it's viral related, and it's a virus that affects the plant that then moves on to the tomato itself. And it almost kind of, it's from what I've seen over the years, it kind of runs in spurts. You'll see it, you'll see a lot of it, and then you won't see it again for maybe 2, 3, 4 years. And then you'll see it again, and it rears its head, ugly head, and then it goes away again. So it's almost like it's cyclical, you know?
They change the varieties so much, maybe one variety becomes immune to it, and then they change it up.
Yeah, hard to tell. The one on the left is just ripening. The one on the right is definitely an abnormal coloring, because it's got those distinct stripes. All right? Yeah. I don't know, maybe if they've got some creative marketing, they'd market this as a twofer. You got something for your BLT and something for fried green tomatoes, all in one package, you know? Definitely a problem. The green portion will never ripen out. And so here's the possible causes. And boron or potassium deficiency. See, I knew we'd have one sooner or later. Too much nitrogen in the soil. Too high a humidity or temperature fluctuations. I mean, too high a humidity. I can't believe that could even be it. They grow tomatoes in Florida. Florida has nothing but too high humidity, 8 months out of the year. So I don't know how that could be what caused it. Too much water, yeah, that's in there. Soil moisture levels. Or too compact a soil. I find that one would be, it's a tough one to sell too. I don't know, of all those, I'm going to stick with number one. I think it is something that is more viral in nature.
High humidity is everywhere.
Exactly. I cannot believe that would be it. Can't believe it. Okay. Here is just normal surface discoloration. Age. That one on the far right almost looks like it's something that went over like a roller injury, where it went over like a set of rollers in a packing house, and that's what caused it. If they go over rollers, and sometimes if the product's wet, it causes it to discolor externally. Here's one that is internal discoloration, but a lot of inspectors and industry folks have always referred to this as gray wall, and it's really because that's what it looks like externally. It just, you pick up the tomato, it just looks like it has this dull cast to it, and you cut the tomato in half, and the inside of it is this grayish brown color. Not very appetizing. And you can only have like a little half-inch circle of it, and here you've got, I don't know, maybe a quarter of the tomato that's affected by it. Sunburn, you allow a lot of the tomato to be colored yellow at the top. I think it's 20% of the tomato can have these yellow crowns on it. And as long as that yellowing hasn't started to sink in and destroy the flesh underneath, that's a lot of area that it's not going to be red, it's going to be yellow from the sunburn. All right, sun scald is a completely different animal. And boy, this affects a lot of different products. Peppers, eggplant, summer squash, cukes, melons, all the berries. And this is where the sun hits the product so hard, it kills Not only the external flesh, but everything underneath it. On tomatoes and eggplants and peppers, it almost looks like these areas will start to sink. It almost looks like tanned leather is what it looks like. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the consistency of tanned leather. Just the opposite. It's paper thin. Just a little, you poke your hole right through it, just barely touching it with your pinky. All right? Decay usually follows it. If they see it in the field while they're packing, they'll drop it and it'll stay right in the field. They won't pack it because they know it's not going to withstand transportation. Normally, by the time you guys would see it, it would already be rotten. Yeah, that whole side of the tomato is dead. And everything underneath it's dead. All right? So, a few other defects, and these are your tomato on the vine defects, all right? The vines have to be pliable, right? They do not have to be green. They can be turning brown as long as they're pliable, all right? If they're brittle, if they're moldy, they're decayed, they're scored as a defect. And there has to be at least 2 tomatoes connected to a vine, unless whoever you're selling it to has a different spec. And I said they go all over. So one company wants 3 to a vine, one wants 4 to a vine, one wants 5 to a vine, minimum. And they have a 10% tolerance for vines that don't have that many tomatoes attached. Boy, this is one that's treated a lot differently by retailers than it is the USDA. All right? If you've got surface mold affecting the stem area of the tomato, it's scored as the damage against the damage tolerance, a 10% tolerance. If it's decayed, it's scored against the 5% tolerance. Most companies, like the retail, the grocery store companies, treat surface mold just as they would decay. You know, and as I tell most of them, I said, look, surface mold is something you can wipe off. To which they all come back and say, yeah, but you know what? We're not in the business of wiping mold off. We're in the business of selling tomatoes, and we can't send this out to our grocery stores and have them put it on the shelves. They won't take it. They're going to want a credit like that as soon as they open the box. They won't take moldy. I don't care if it's just a superficial mold growth. Sometimes you get what they call cooler mold. It won't come in and be moldy, but because you've got the right humidity, the right environment, the right temperature in that cooler, you'll get a little bit of mold growth on the top of the stem area. And you wipe it off, and that's the end of that. Yeah, well, a lot of chains won't take it. They'll say that's decay. And it really is a decay, but nonetheless. Here's a question I ask every class. We got 4 tomatoes. Are they all soft? Any of them soft?
You're asking us to see a sensory.
There's the answer I was looking for. Well, I've sat here for 10 minutes in classes, and for a light finally went on and say, well, wait a minute, we can't touch them. I said, there's a clue. All they have to do is go in the palm of your hand, one little squeeze. And this is a defect. Remember, there's a 5% tolerance for soft tomatoes. Trying to find one that... Now, if I pass these around, by the time it gets to you on the other end, it will probably be soft. You only get one squeeze, and you got to pass it. Would you score that one as soft?
No.
No. Okay.
I would.
You would. Okay.
Down there, I'll get it.
No, you get it light. It will be soft. When you get it, it'll be soft. So,
Squeeze twice.
so your analysis doesn't count. We know what yours is. It's going to be soft. Yes or no? No.
No.
No. No. No.
Oh,
No.
no.
No. Go ahead. Yeah. I don't think it's it. Because they all did it the right way.
Horrible, but-
They all gave it just one little squeeze.
Except for her. She squeezed it twice.
Or 3.
No, she was.
And you didn't, you remember, you squeeze it in the palm, don't do this, because boy, you will make it soft, and you'll bruise it in the process.
Maybe that's what I
Yeah,
said.
this one isn't even close to soft, not even close. No, they really have to be spongy. I'm gonna say this is one This is probably one of the defects that, as an inspector, I was probably too tight on. You know, it's scoring soft tomatoes. I went down and worked with some of the folks down in Florida and some of the packing houses, and they looked, he says, you know, what are you're killing us. You know, you guys are scoring soft tomatoes, and they're not even close. You know, they really have to have a lot of give to them to score them as soft. Almost spongy soft. And it's one step. I think that's why the rationale to set the soft and decay into a tolerance that combines both, because they want it to be so soft that it's one step from decay. It's that close, okay? Yeah, and then again, and look at how much, depending on what tolerance or what standard you're working, you could, the range of decays varies significantly. Whether you're going from a greenhouse to the tomato on the vine up to the fresh, a 1 to 5 range. That's a hell of a range. You know, and 5% decay is a disaster as far as I'm concerned. It's a mess. And they can get pretty messy. Now, you know, we grade tomatoes on the vine. So here we have these 3 tomatoes connected to one vine. 2 tomatoes are perfect, and the one has got a big old spot of decay on it. And we're doing this, determining our percentages by count. Do I have 1 tomato that's decayed, or do I count 3 tomatoes that are decayed?
1.
1? 1? 1? Everybody agree?
I want to say 3.
Huh? Are you just trying to be devil's advocate? Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes that works.
It's on the vine.
Sometimes that devil's advocate thing works, but not this time.
Doesn't it depend
Yeah.
on what your company determines on the vine is?
Huh?
2 tomatoes, 3 tomatoes.
What you got to remember, you have certain defects of the vines themselves, and plus you have a certain defect that's called detached tomatoes. But when you're doing the inspection, you're looking at each individual tomato and the count of the actual tomatoes that are in the box. And at that point, it doesn't matter if they're attached or not. You're looking at them individually for decay. So that would be 1 out of 3 is all you count for decay. Okay? And if I was now, let's say I'm counting defects of the vine because my client or my customer insists that there be at least 4 tomatoes attached. And so I'm looking at all my vines individually. That now, because there's 3 attached, that's a defect. For their spec, that counts as 3 tomatoes. And that's how you would determine the percentage of not enough tomatoes attached to the vine.
So we're all right.
Don't you love it when that, how bad is that when that happens, right? All right? Any questions? Take a 5-minute potty break, and then we'll do avocados and peppers, and then we're going to look at all of them before lunch. Okay?